Hey everybody, how are you? I'm sorry, I was typing in there while you were waiting. I forgot to put my little screen up. So I'm just seeing some people come on in. Hi Marcy, hi Sarah, hi Linda, how are you? I'm so looking forward to today's tutorial. I think you will be too. It's going to be quite fun. We've got a paper piecing tutorial today. It's on flying geese. And as you can see, the quilt behind me has flying geese. This is a quilt from my book, Splash of Color. And I thought it would be appropriate just to display a quilt behind me that had flying geese. Just curious, give me a thumbs up if you have ever done flying geese. And give me a heart if you've ever paper pieced flying geese. There are so many different ways, and I've taught many different ways on how to do flying geese. There are two that I really like because of the precision. Awesome. There's lots of thumbs up that you've done them and some hearts. Awesome. The two ways that I like most are paper piecing, and then there's the other version where you're piecing it, but you can make 4 at a time, and that's a great one if you are doing the same fabric, same colorways. And I do teach that one with some of my quilts as well. So if you are ready to get going, I would love to start the tutorial. Hit the share button, share it with your friends who you might think might be interested in the paper piecing tutorial, and we're going to get going. So let me switch. I'm going to switch to my overhead camera so that you can see some of the tools, and I'm going to put myself in the corner here. What we're going to do today is we are going to actually work on, I'm going to paper piece the flying geese from my pattern Carnival Nights that we just launched, because I had a couple questions from, actually one question in particular from a student of mine that had taken a recent class with me about the placement of the fabrics, fabric D2 and D3 over here are the units D2 and D3, fabric number 2, which is your background fabric. So I'm specifically going to talk about placement. I am going to show you how to do the paper piecing as well, but placement is ever so important. If you have ever tried to paper piece and your fabric does not cover that piece or that section of the unit, then you're going to have problems. You'll probably end up with a little hole in the fabric somewhere around the seam line. You might end up very short in fabric. So I'm going to show you how I do that. And in the pattern, that particular pattern and my other patterns, I do have you pre-cut the fabric, and I give you enough fabric to make sure that you cover those units. So let me just show you one unit right off the bat, just so you can kind of see. So here is one of the units, all complete, my background fabrics and my flying geese. Now, this is where the question came in. So you can see here and here, the fabric comes up a little bit short, and let me just zoom in on that. Hang on a second, let me get me out of here so I can zoom in. And then you can see what I'm talking about. So see where there's a little bit of fabric short, you're still in the seam allowance, and that's going to get covered. That's within the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that's not going to be a huge deal. But I'm going to show you how to place it so that you're within that seam allowance. The reason being, now there are a couple things that you can do, obviously, to avoid that. I give you specific instructions on how to cut your fabric. So I give you specific measurements. One of the things that can easily remedy that, obviously, is you can cut your fabric piece larger than what I've told you, but that will affect your yardage in the end. The way that I have you cut this gives you more than enough fabric to cover that piece, and you're going to see here in a second. Okay, so let's get started. Some of the things that you're going to need just to do the paper piecing is you're going to need, I use this repositionable glue, and I put that for the very first piece of fabric down. Then you're going to need an add-a-quarter ruler. If you've never used an add-a-quarter ruler, it has this little lip on it which will give you the perfect seam allowance that you need. Template plastic, which you'll need to, is where the little lip on the add-a-quarter will grab onto so it won't move when you're cutting it. You'll need your rotary cutter. I use a fabric glue pen. If you've never used one, you are gonna love it because it takes the place of pins. And I'm gonna show you how you get your piece covered or your section covered. I'm gonna show you by using pencil just to show you the markings. Okay, then you're gonna obviously need, you're gonna need your paper foundation. Okay, so here's something that I want to bring up to you, and this is super important. And whenever I teach paper piecing, I always bring this up and tell my students this. My wire is pulling. Hang on a second, I'm sitting on my wire, my mic. I can feel it pulling on my neck. So one of the things that's super important, and let me zoom in again on this because I want you to see, not me, hang on. We want to zoom in on this so you can see what I'm talking about. So when I trimmed down my unit, you can see how close I got to the outside line. So you want to be about 1/8 of an inch from that outside dotted line, because this here, from this line to this line, that's your seam allowance. So let me mark that. So this is your seam allowance right here. Okay, this right here is all your seam allowance. This is the outer edge of the block, this dotted line. You want to trim your paper foundation units down to about 1/8 of an inch outside of that. The more paper you have outside this unit, the more likely you are to line your fabric up with paper out here that isn't even your block. This is your block. All your fabric should be here on this block. More times than not, I see people have all this excess newsprint or copy paper or whatever you're using out here, and they're putting their fabric on and they're lining it up with the edge of that, which then leaves you less fabric where it should be. So make sure, that's so crucial, that you're trimming that down to 1/8 of an inch, and then you can get to work. Okay, so now I'm going to pop myself back in. So now that you've done that and you've done your trimming, okay, you're going to get started on your paper piecing. So let me just put these over here so I can show you what we're going to do to start. So you're going to first take your first piece, and this is your goose. You can see how oversized this is. I made it this bigger than the entire piece, but it needs to cover this triangle here. So that's super important, that it needs to cover this area. Okay, let me just zoom in just a little more just so you can see. Let me just zoom in a little more. I'll come close in, that way you can see a little better. Okay, so it's got to cover this triangle. Okay, that's super important. Then we can trim it down if we need to from there, and we're going to be trimming it down anyway because we have to add our other fabrics, correct? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my piece, and now I have in the instructions, I have you cutting that colored piece that way. I'm using my repositionable glue. All of the things that I'm using, by the way, are available on my website, so you can go ahead and grab them if you need them. I'm going to use this repositionable glue. It's like a sticky note, okay, and it's tacky. It doesn't leave any residue on your fabric, and it takes the place of pinning it on, and this way your fabric is not going to move, whereas if you just put a pin on there, your fabric is likely to shift. Now, here is what I'm going to do. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to trim this down to within that. And if you wanted to, you can cut your initial fabric down. I'm at a weird angle here. Hang on a second. My arm is at a weird angle. There we go. You could trim it to the size of that, but I like again, I like to have you oversize your pieces, because that way you get the correct coverage you need, and then you can make any trim down that you need to do from there on in. So these are just going to be scraps, and you can get rid of those. Okay, so now we want to add our next piece. Our next pieces of fabric are going to be your backgrounds, and I had you cut them into these rectangles. So what we're going to do from here is we are going to take our template plastic, and we are going to fold our newsprint back to expose the Flying Geese fabric. You're going to add your add-a-quarter ruler. You're going to take your rotary cutter, and you're going to trim that down to 1/4 of an inch. You will have a sizable scrap, and a lot of people do like to save these scraps. You could probably make little, square them up, make half square triangles, and have them for another project, or you can use them as a leader or an ender as well. Once you've done that, you're going to take your background piece, and this is where placement matters. So this background piece has to cover this folded area. Now you notice when I folded this back, I have not opened this back up. I have not turned it over. I've not done anything. I've kept it, left it folded, because I can see where it's got to cover. And what I mean by that, let me mark it. So this is, again, the edge of the block. I'm sorry, I'm right-handed, so it's coming, I'm over top of it right at the moment. So I apologize. So that's the edge of our block, but that white piece has to cover that area, okay? So if this piece covers this, you're fine, okay? And what I mean by that, so if I were to place this, now I want to match up the seam that I just created to the edge of this block. So if I laid it like this and match that seam up here, right now I've got this, I can see I've got it covering at least here, but I can see that that rectangle ends there. So in other words, I have no fabric there. That means it's not covering that area where it needs to cover. So what do? I need to make sure it's going to cover that. So I'm going to shift it this way to make sure it covers that area. And the same thing happens if I were to shift it this way. I could see that the white ends here, and it's not covering this area because I have no fabric underneath there. So therefore, it isn't covering the entire section. So I want to make sure that I'm covering that section. Now, in this block, like I showed you before, let me grab that little goose out of here. Okay, like I showed you before, this one comes up a little short in the rectangle, and it's okay. The fabric that the dimensions that I had you cut will cover this. So when you lay it down here, it comes to, that white piece is going to come to right about here and right about here. So there's a little bit on either end, but that is within your seam allowance. So when you start joining the blocks together, it will disappear. You won't see it. So what I'm going to do to keep that in place, now that I know that I've got that in the right place because it's covering, I can see the fabric all the way down here. And you can double check this by going like this, taking your template plastic and pulling up the whole thing, seeing if you've got fabric there and seeing if you've got fabric here, because that's where your lines end and you've got fabric there. Okay, that's where your section per se ends. So now I want to keep that in place. So this is where the fabric glue pen comes in, which I love. And if any of you have ever used this technique, I think you like it too. Better than pinning. All I do is fold back that section, that first section, seam allowance, and put a little glue on that second section that I'm adding, and it keeps it in place. No pins necessary. Is that the coolest thing? Okay, so now I'm going to switch views, and I am going to put us here at the sewing machine because I want to show you what you're going to do next. So we have, excuse me, I have here, I have a Viking, and I'm using my A foot on it. I'm not using a 1/4 inch foot at the moment. My A foot is wider. It has a larger opening where I can see the line, because I'm just going to sew the line. I'm not sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance at this point. Also, what I have is I'm using my Aurifil thread in here at 50 weight thread for any kind of piecing. I'm using Dove Gray, which is my default, or I usually use cream, but I tend to have a lot of the Dove Gray, which is the 2600. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to sew on the line. And I'm actually going to start, actually let me come back to the other view because I want to show you real quick. So I'm actually going to start off of the line. I'm going to start here and come off here. So I'm not going to start right where the line begins and end right where it ends. I'm going to start before and end after. Okay, so let me switch back and you can see where I'm going to do that. Now, I also have a Microtex 7010 needle in, and I've taken my stitch length down to a 1.5 because we want to perforate this paper. We want a nice strong seam allowance, so when we pull the papers away, we're not pulling the stitches out. So remember to adjust your stitch length. That is super important. Okay, here we go. And we're just going to go straight down this line until we get to the other end. And we can go off that and we can feed in our next geese. If you prepared more than one and you're chain piecing, then you can do that. So I have sewed down that one section. Let me switch over here so you can see this section is now sewn down. Now what we want to do is we want to press it. We want to press that open or to the one side. So all I'm going to do is turn it over, take my iron, and I'm going to press it to the one side. Okay? And this is what it will look like at this point. Okay, so it will look just like that. It looks kind of odd, but that's okay because this is all going to get trimmed off. Remember, this is all excess. I gave you plenty of fabric here. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add that next piece. So we're going to turn it back over to this side. We're going to take our template plastic. We are going to fold on the next line, and we've sewn through it a little bit, so we're going to take back all that fabric. We're going to hold down our newsprint underneath and pull at that seam allowance and rip it away from the paper. It's okay that it rips away, not a big deal. Okay, so then we're going to trim that down. Same process as before. You're creating that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then you're going to take your piece of fabric, your next piece of fabric, and you're going to do the same lineup as you did before. Remember, we want it to cover this area here, okay, which is the edge of your block. Okay, so if you need to do this as a visual, and this works on any kind of paper piecing, not just Flying Geese, so you can totally do that on any kind of paper piecing. And that's basically the way I teach all my students. And it is a great visual, especially if you're just starting out. to know where you're trying to place it. Okay, so I'm placing it exactly the same way as I did before, and I'm going to take my fabric glue pen and I'm going to go ahead, pull that up and glue it down. Okay, now it's ready to go to the sewing machine again. Let's click on over there and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to sew straight down that line so that you're going to start before it and end after it. And remember, we're just sewing on the line. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to press this again. So let's go ahead and press this. Okay. We're going to press this to one side. And now here is what you have. Whoops. Here's what you have right here. This is the final result after you have sewn everything, but we still have yet to trim it down. So let's do that. Let's go trim this down. Okay, so you'll be able to see where there's those little tiny gaps that you might question that aren't working for you. So we're going to turn this over and I'm just going to go ahead and trim this right on that outside dotted line because that is the edge of the block. So we're going to do that and you'll see the finished product. Then I'm going to show you what happens when you join these pieces together and how that disappears because it's inside your seam allowance. Okay, so easy to do. And if you're paying good attention to yourself and you're organized, you won't end up with the holes there and you will place them properly. It just takes, a few seconds longer just to make sure that you've placed it properly, and you will have a really beautiful flying goose and geese. Okay, so here is what it looks like, and you can see there's a little bit here and there's a teeny tiny little bit at the top. So let me zoom in on that again and you can see where it's at. Okay, so let's zoom in on that. See how there's just a little bit here and then a little bit there and a little bit there. That's okay. That is inside the seam allowance. Okay, now I want to show you when you join these together what happens. So I'm going to join two together for you, but first I want to show you. Let's zoom out here. So these are from, this is from my pattern Carnival Nights. This is the border. So these are a set of 5 that are joined together as they should be in the pattern. Okay, and you can see, let me zoom back in. So you can see a little bit has disappeared here, but remember when the seam allowance comes in here, that will get taken in too. So it's not a big deal. You can see everyone has all disappeared with the exception of a little bit of the yellow here and a little bit of the red, which is okay because that'll get taken up in the next seam allowance. Okay, so let me show you the next step here. Okay. Let's take this red and this blue one, okay? Now, really super easy. At this point, you're going to take the papers off, okay? Papers come off super easy because remember we perforated them. You just need to give it a fold. And by the way, you're going to see how that repositionable glue works here. It basically, you just snap it and it comes right off. No residue on the fabric. Everything comes out clean, which is super nice. Okay, same to the next block. You don't need to leave the paper on. If you leave the paper on, remember you're going to be sewing through 4 layers instead of just 2 because you're sewing through 2 layers of paper and 2 layers of fabric, which adds bulk. We don't want to do that. Okay, so this is super easy. This is just regular piecing at this point. And you can pin if you like. So I like to use my my little very fine pins that I have, and they're on the website. They come in, they're the green, oh no, that's orange one, hang on. So they're green and orange. I don't know if you could see that. There you go. Green and orange, and they're really super fine. So you can pin if you like, and what you're going to do is just right sides together, okay, and you can match up your ends and weave them in. And there's no seam matching here except the sides. So we're just going to go ahead and match the sides and then weave your pin in, okay? Now, this is the point when you start joining things together. I'm going to show you here. Okay. So when you start joining, I weave them in. That keeps things from becoming kind of wonky, if you will. So now, what you want to do is you want to change your stitch length out, okay? So you're going to change your stitch length. I change it up to 2.0 here. And I'm also going to take my A foot off, and I'm going to put my 1/4 inch foot on. So see the difference? So the 1/4 inch foot is much narrower. So I'm going to guide the fabric along that 1/4 inch, the side of the 1/4 inch foot, so that we have that perfect 1/4 inch seam. So that's, make sure when you're getting to the regular piecing, you do that if you have left a larger foot on so that you can see the lines. Change out to a 1/4 inch foot if you have one. If you don't, invest in one. They're great, and they make piecing super easy. I love mine, and it's probably one of the ones that is on my machine the most. Okay, let's switch over to the machine. And basically all I'm going to do here is, like I said, I'm going to do 1/4 inch seam allowance. I've moved my stitch length from a 1.5 to a 2.0, and we're just going to go ahead and sew. Now don't sew over your pins, please, because we know what that can do. It can not only break your needle, but it could also mess up your timing. If you have needle down, oh, and I probably should flip this on the other side, because you can watch yourself going through the tip of the Flying Geese so that you know that you're getting, you know, the accuracy there. But I can assure you this is going to be pretty good. If it's not, I'll probably end up ripping it out. That's how much of a perfectionist I can be at times. So I'm coming to the end. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and cut that, and let me show you how we did here. Okay, so we came, wow, look at that, it's perfect, it's perfect. Let's go back to the overhead view. Whoops, here we go. So you can see I'm going to press that. So now you can press this. There's two views here. You can either, I'm going to trim this though. I am such a thread trimmer. I don't like extra threads hanging around. I trim as I go along because threads can get stuck in your seam allowances. So what you can do here is you can press it to one side, and if you press it, you're going to press it to the side of the goose, the bottom of the goose, because there's no seams there. Don't press it down towards here because there is a seam there. So you're going to press it one way, and in fact, let's show you. Let me show you here. I'm going to press this one, and then I'll show you both. So I'm going to give it I'm going to set the seam first. So I leave it closed, if you will. I leave it closed. Let me move this out of the way, so you can see what I'm doing. There we go. We're going to move that up there. So I'm just pressing that, giving it setting the seam, and then I'm going to press the Flying Geese towards that, and I've covered up some of that 1/4 inch, right? And then when I go ahead and join, Okay, let me show you here. We're going to come back to the overhead view. I hope you guys like these different views. I hope you can see them really well. Okay, so we've got a little bit here that's open, but now remember, when I add my side piece here, that will completely disappear. That will get caught up in that seam allowance. So now here I want to show you the back. See how I pressed it up towards that goose? And then here's the back of the long one. Let me zoom out on this. Oh no, you know, I guess I don't need to. I press this way. Now, if you wanted to, you can press the seams open. You can, but then you'd be pressing towards this seam here. So it could add a little bulk to it, but it lays really nice. I like to use Mary Ellen's Best Press to make them lay a little flat for you, but you can see how I've got all these little perfect points here because I went right at the 1/4 inch. I covered up any little, if you will, opening by coming in right at the 1/4 inch, and you have enough fabric. So I want to kind of review what I went over so you know from the beginning what to do. And then I'm going to show you a couple things that I've been up to this week because I know a lot of you have commented and I wanted to share it with you. So the very first and most important thing that you will need to do when you're setting up your paper piecing is, for any paper piecing, is you need to trim your foundation unit down to within 1/8 of an inch of the edge of that block so that you don't have excess newsprint on either side. That way you can properly line up your fabrics so that you're covering the area you need to cover. So that's super important. That's number 1 on the list. Make sure you cut off that excess newsprint. That gives you a clearer view of where your block actually is. Okay? Take the time to do it. I stack my foundations on top of one another and then I cut them with the rotary cutter. So, but they have to be all lined up. So make sure if you're doing that, that they're lined up. So that's the number 1 thing. Then, of course, as I said before, when you're placing it, you can use your pencil to show the placement of it if you need to, just for the visualization. And that will get you your perfectly covered sections on your units. So I know that I wanted to go over a couple things with you. So first of all, again, this was from my Carnival Nights pattern. Links are all in the description for that. If you haven't gotten yours, it's been really popular, and I'm so happy to see a lot of you have started on it. That's awesome. If you like this quilt behind me, this is in my book, Splash of Color, the pattern for it. There's only, believe it or not, a few hard copies left anywhere. And I actually have them in my shop. If you don't have my book, Splash of Color, you can get it in my online shop. So that's there. But what I wanted to share with you is some of you have seen my posts and you commented how much you like them, and I wanted to share these with you. So this week, last week, I had 2 of my quilting friends from back east visiting with me, and it was super nice and super relaxing for me to kind of just have fun. We went to QuiltCon last week. It was here in Phoenix, and had a great time. And one of the things that we did, I'm going to turn this onto the other camera so you can see. We bought this pattern from Sewn, Wyoming. It's called a Zip It bag. And we saw it in a booth and we really just liked it, and we thought it would be a quick little project to kind of all do together. And I did a little post. We all made bags. My very first bag that I made from it was this one, and I used my Splash, or my Color Splash fabric line that is in my online shop. So it's cute. I used, I cut 1.5 inch strips, and I just did like a couple panels, and then I cut it down and then just pieced those strips together. And then I used my feature fabric in the collection, the multicolor mandalas, for the bottom of it, And the big chunky zipper I absolutely love. And I used my striped fabric for the binding. And then it can carry anything, like a project. It can be a makeup bag. It can be anything. Like say you're going on a trip on your airplane and you just have a small project. You can stick it in here, English paper piecing, cross stitching, whatever you have, use it in here. And I did use a variegated thread to quilt it. I used from my Ancient Etchings thread collection, Aurifil thread collection. I used one of the multis to, I can't see if you can see the color, but it's a multicolor thread that I used on that one. So that was really fun to make. So that was the first one. So this one was a little more time consuming only because I kind of made my fabric. I tried to use a little bit of each of the fabrics that were in my fabric line. I just thought it would be fun. And so it took me a little bit more time because I pieced that area. This would be great too. Like if you have an embroidery machine, you can do an embroidery here and then piece it in. It would be so much fun. Then the second bag I made, I had so much fun with this one too. This one was from my Blinded by Science fabric collection, which I love, and I love the colors. So I used just one fabric on the sides and then another fabric on the bottom. So I used 2 fabrics on the outside. Well, 3 actually, because the binding is actually a different fabric. So I used 3. 1, 2, 3 on the outside. This chunky zipper again, and it came in this gray and this magenta, just like my fabrics. Excuse me. And then on the inside, I used one of the multis from the water molecules, the multicolor fabrics from my Blinded by Science fabric collection. And this one I kind of did a cross hatching quilting on it, and I used my Blinded by Science Aurifil thread collection. I think I actually have that thread right here. Oh, and I actually have the other thread here too, I could show you. So this thread was the one that I used to do the quilting on this one. Okay, that was that thread, and maybe it wasn't this thread. I thought it was this one. I don't think it's that one. No, I think I used an orange variegated. I think I used an orange variegated on this one. It was a different one, but anyway, you get the idea. And I just did straight line quilting on this one. This one I did straight line quilting too, but I did it both ways. I did kind of like a crosshatch, and I simply did them on my sewing machine. I didn't put it on the long arm, but you can put it on your long arm. You can do two, if you want to make a lot of them. You really can make like a whole bunch of fabric just by laying it out and then cutting out the templates, and rather than doing it the way I did it. I wanted to have a couple different feature fabrics. I think it gives it a little more character, I guess, if that makes any sense. I thought there would be a little more fun showing a few more fabrics. My friend Lisa, who was here, she did just 3. She did 1 fabric on the outside, a binding, and then the other fabric on the inside. So she used 3 different fabrics, where I used here 4, and this one I used multiple different fabrics. So you can do it so many different ways. My friend Janet, she did an improvisational piece, so she used a lot of different fabrics in hers. So anyway, so that's what I kind of been up to this week. I wanted to see if you all had any questions on the paper piecing. Please put them in the comments. I'm going to scroll back and see if there are any questions at the moment, and I will do my best to answer what I can. Let me scroll back and see what we have here. Let's see. Deb, got my... Awesome, Deb. I'm glad you got your strips. She won the giveaway a few weeks ago. That's awesome. Let's see who else is here. Laura's here. Betsy's here. Anna, Linda. Awesome. Let's see. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. No questions on the paper piecing. I'm surprised. Well, if you do have questions, you can always pop them in the comments. I will be looking at the comments. If you're watching this now and you missed it live, if you missed me live, you can always watch the playback. If you want to come back to this at a later date, you can always watch the playback on my YouTube channel. They're always there. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, definitely hit subscribe and then click on the bell notification, and every time a new video is uploaded, you will get a notification that there's a new video. There is a question here. Let's see. It's from Terry. Will you be teaching a Judy Niemeyer class? I have one of your kits and would love to attend. I don't have any local, I'm not sure where you're from, Terry. I don't have any currently scheduled, and that's partially because of, everything that's still going on with COVID and people were just kind of getting back into it. But I do have an online class, a Judy Niemeyer online class that you can watch. It's on Craftsy. So you can do it there. I do have some tutorials on my YouTube channel that you can watch there. A lot of people who have taken my Judy Niemeyer classes have done my Craftsy class first, and that has been their springboard to something more difficult for Judy Niemeyer. So if you can't get to one of mine locally, you can certainly do it online with my Craftsy class. So I hope that answers your question. Let's see. I saw a couple other questions come up. Let me scrolling here. Thank you, Linda. She says, I'm a great teacher. Thank you so much. Okay, Deb says, you use a standard needle rather than a 90. I use a 7010 Microtex needle. And the reason why I use that is because it is it's a smaller needle. It's a little more razor sharp. It's not as rounded. It's more precise. So it will go into your, when you're sewing on the line, it's not going to make as big of a hole either, especially if you are sewing with batiks or anything like that. You'll have a smaller hole. I find it's just more precision. So yeah, I don't use a regular universal needle. Unless maybe I'm doing something garment-like, or I really don't, I have to say, I really don't use a universal needle unless I ran out of Microtex and that's all I have left in my drawer. I don't know if that makes any sense. So, but yeah, I like using a Microtex 7010. So, okay, let's see. Yay, Sidna, you watched. Awesome. Awesome. Sarah, thanks for the great tutorial. And Sarah, I can't wait to see you in a little bit, Sarah. So Sarah is part of my team. She helps me make all those deadlines. So, and Chewy is her dog, and apparently I put him to sleep. I hope I didn't put you all to sleep either. So, anyway, thanks, Sarah. Let's see. Oh, Terry, you're in Gilbert. Awesome. I don't have any scheduled for the area right now, but message me. I mean, if you're in a guild or something and you're looking, if your guild is looking for something close by, definitely message me and we could see if we can work something out with your guild. I hope that helps. Okay, so let's see. Oh, if there's any more. Nope. Awesome. Deb's going to get started on her Carnival Nights. Yay! Awesome. If you have seen anything that you like here, remember the links are in the description. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, please, and give me a thumbs up on the videos and put your comments there on YouTube. It helps me to keep getting these out to the quilting masses. So thanks for coming in today. Happy Wednesday, happy quilting, and have a great rest of your week. I will see you in 2 weeks. And get out there and make some great flying geese. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.